There's a staircase inside Graceland that millions of people have walked past, glanced up at, and never been allowed to climb. Since the estate first opened its doors to the public in 1982, that staircase has represented one of the most tantalizing unsolved mysteries in American pop culture, a boundary between the world as fans know it and the private interior life of the most famous entertainer who ever lived. Below the landing, the jungle room, the peacock stained glass windows, the gold records, the jumpsuits. Above it, silence, preserved, untouched, and until very recently, almost entirely unspoken about. That silence is finally beginning to break. Not through a press release, not through a documentary crew gaining unprecedented access, but through something far more personal. The words of Riley Keough, Elvis Presley's eldest granddaughter, who became the sole owner of Graceland following the death of her mother, Lisa Marie Presley, in January 2023. In a series of interviews, a major memoir project, and a landmark television special with Oprah Winfrey, Riley has begun to illuminate what that upstairs floor truly means, not just architecturally, but emotionally, historically, and for a family that has spent nearly 5 decades protecting something sacred from the outside world. To understand why the upstairs of Graceland carries such extraordinary weight, you have to start with the house itself and what it represented to the man who bought it. In 1957, Elvis Presley was 22 years old, already a phenomenon and desperately in need of somewhere that belonged entirely to him. He paid $102,500 for the estate, a colonial revival mansion sitting on what was then the quiet outskirts of Memphis, Tennessee. The house had been built in 1939 and, before Elvis arrived, was a place of relative calm and modest grandeur. That would change quickly and dramatically. Over the next 2 decades, Presley transformed Graceland from a private refuge into a physical expression of his own personality, bold, theatrical, deeply personal, and always a little difficult to categorize. He installed the now legendary Jungle Room, a space so gloriously eccentric that it seems to belong to another dimension entirely, with green shag carpet climbing the walls and ceiling, chunky wooden furniture with waterfall features carved into the arms, an atmosphere that felt more like a fevered dream of the tropics than the sitting room of a southern mansion. Elvis used it to record some of his final studio sessions, including the tracks that would become part of the posthumously released album Moody Blue. He added a kidney-shaped swimming pool, a racquetball court, and a wrought iron music gate at the front of the property, designed by local artisan Abe Sauer, that still greets visitors today with silhouetted guitar figures set against sheet music. He ringed the grounds in pink Alabama fieldstone, now layered with decades of fan graffiti. Every addition was an act of self-expression, and every room told a different story about who Elvis was and what he needed from the world. But the rooms that told the most honest stories were the ones upstairs, away from the set pieces and the spectacle. The second floor of Graceland was where Elvis actually lived. It was where he slept, read, thought, and retreated from the crushing weight of his own fame. It was where his study was lined with books on numerology, Christian theology, and Eastern mysticism, subjects that fascinated him deeply, even as his public image remained rooted in sequins and showmanship. And it was on August 16, 1977, where his life came to its end. The upstairs bathroom, where Elvis was found unresponsive that afternoon, has never been open to the public. Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, gave the order shortly after his son's death. The second floor was to remain sealed, not as a publicity strategy, but as an act of love and grief. Nothing was to be moved, altered, or disturbed. The rooms were to stay exactly as they were. And for nearly 50 years, that is precisely what happened. Elvis's bedroom and his daughter Lisa Marie's bedroom were never incorporated into the Graceland tours, remaining private family spaces throughout the decades that the estate has been open to visitors. This was not merely a legal or logistical decision. It was a deeply felt boundary, maintained generation after generation. When Riley Keough was a child visiting Graceland with her mother, the upstairs was simply understood to be different. It was family space, sacred ground. As Riley has described it, only a very small number of people were ever permitted upstairs, immediate family and a handful of trusted individuals. Lisa Marie kept a key with her and treated that floor as her own private sanctuary within the larger public-facing estate. Riley's relationship with Graceland as a whole was shaped by her childhood visits, and those memories carry a warmth that is inseparable from her understanding of the place today. When the tours were running during the day, the family would wait upstairs until the visitors cleared out, and then the ropes would come down. The house would become theirs again, and Riley and her cousins would run to the rooms, play pool, and sit together for holiday dinners in what was, to them, simply home. There is something almost surreal about that image, one of the most visited private residences in the United States, second only to the White House in terms of annual visitors, functioning in the afternoons as a place where a grandmother warmed up leftovers and a group of children chased each other around the furniture. But the upstairs always held a different quality. It was quieter, more charged. You could feel, even as a child, that it held something that the rest of the house did not. The weight of inheriting all of this fell on Riley in ways that no one could fully prepare for. Lisa Marie Presley died on January 12, 2023, at the age of 54, following a cardiac event. Her death sent shockwaves through a public that had watched her navigate the impossible burden of being Elvis Presley's only child, a position that brought her both profound love and profound suffering throughout her entire life. Following the months-long legal process that followed, a Los Angeles judge confirmed Riley Keough as the sole owner of Graceland and the Presley estate, making her not just a family member with emotional ties to the property, but its official legal guardian. That transition came with responsibilities that extended far beyond property management. Riley now controls one of the most valuable and culturally significant estates in American history. Her stated hope is to continue what her grandmother Priscilla and then her mother began, to preserve Graceland as a family home, not merely as a museum or a commercial enterprise. That framing matters. The distinction between a preserved family home and a packaged tourist attraction is not just semantic. It shapes every decision she makes about what to share, what to protect, and how to tell the story of a man whose public image has always threatened to overwhelm the reality of the human being beneath it. It was in service of that goal, humanizing Elvis rather than simply mythologizing him, that Riley undertook perhaps the most emotionally demanding project of her life, completing her mother's memoir. In 2022, Lisa Marie had asked Riley to help her finish a long-gestating memoir she had been working on for years. A month after that conversation, Lisa Marie was gone. Riley received the audio tapes her mother had recorded for the project, recordings in which Lisa Marie told stories about her childhood at Graceland, about the unconditional love she felt from her father, about the two of them being upstairs together, just the two of them, in those private rooms, and had to decide whether she had the strength to listen. She did listen. And what emerged from that process was a memoir, From Here to the Great Unknown, published in October 2024, which became an Oprah's Book Club selection and was accompanied by a major CBS primetime special, an Oprah special. The Presleys, Elvis, Lisa Marie, and Riley, filmed at Graceland itself. In the CBS interview, Riley and Oprah discussed the lasting emotional impact of Graceland on the Presley family, including the way Lisa Marie often retreated to Elvis's bedroom after his death, staying in a room where he had slept, listening to his music, as a way of maintaining a connection with him that the world outside could not offer her. This detail, Lisa Marie in Elvis's bedroom, alone with his records and his memory, does more to illuminate the upstairs of Graceland than any floor plan or guided tour ever could. The second floor was not simply the area where Elvis slept. It was the space where the family's most private grief lived, where a daughter wanted to feel close to a father she had lost at 9 years old, where the personal history of one of America's most remarkable families was stored not in display cases, but in the very air of the rooms themselves. Riley has described the experience of listening to her mother's recordings as emotionally overwhelming at first, and then, as she grew accustomed to the process, as something that shifted depending on what her mother was talking about. Some tapes were funny. Some were deeply touching. Some carried a grief so raw that it was almost unbearable to sit with. What runs through all of it is a portrait of a family that loved each other fiercely and lost each other repeatedly. Elvis gone in 1977. Lisa Marie's son Benjamin gone in 2020. Lisa Marie herself gone in 2023. The upstairs of Graceland holds all of that history. It is not just a time capsule of the 1970s. It is an archive of a family's entire emotional life. Riley has been careful, deliberate, and deeply thoughtful about how much of that she shares. The upstairs remains closed to public, and she has made clear that it will stay that way. She has spoken about the upper rooms as the place where Elvis was most himself, and has described the space as belonging to him and to the family in a way that transcends its status as a historical site. There is no tour being planned. There are no cameras being invited upstairs for a special access documentary. The boundary that Vernon Presley drew in 1977 has not been erased. It has simply been explained for the first time by someone with the authority and the intimacy to do so. What Riley has done, rather than opening the rooms, is open the conversation around them through the memoir, through the Oprah interview, through appearances on programs like Late Night with Seth Meyers, where she spoke candidly about what it was actually like to grow up spending weekends inside a functioning tourist attraction. She has offered the public something arguably more valuable than a floor plan. She has offered context, understanding, a sense of the emotional truth behind the locked door, without the violation of turning grief into entertainment. The questions that have always surrounded the upstairs of Graceland are not really about architecture or artifacts. They are about who Elvis was when no one was watching, the books he read, the thoughts he wrote down, the way he spent the final years of a life that had, by any measure, become almost impossibly difficult to live. Fame had given him everything and taken everything in return. By the mid-1970s, he was in chronic pain, struggling with the medication required to manage it, and living in increasing isolation on that second floor. The concerts were still happening. He performed until weeks before his death, but the man performing them was not the same man who had shaken the world 20 years earlier. He was someone trying, in every private moment available to him, to find a way back to peace. The upstairs of Graceland, in this light, is not just a sealed historical exhibit. It is the record of that search. The books on spirituality and mysticism, the notes written in the margins of Scripture, the music recorded not for release but for himself, in the small hours when the house was quiet. These are not the artifacts of a legend. They are the evidence of a human being grappling with questions that fame could not answer and money could not resolve. Riley Keough understands this distinction in a way that perhaps no one else living can. She is not a historian who has studied Elvis from the outside. She is his blood. She grew up hearing her mother's stories that included the laughter and the chaos and the love, but also the grief and the loss and the complicated reality of being raised in the shadow of an absence that never stopped being felt. Through the memoir, through the recordings, through the act of listening to her mother's voice describe a childhood spent in those rooms, Riley has developed a relationship with Graceland's upstairs that is not academic or curatorial. It is personal. She has spoken publicly about wanting to go beyond the surface-level celebrity narrative that has always surrounded her family, to present Elvis and Lisa Marie as fully dimensional human beings rather than cultural symbols. That means acknowledging complexity, the struggle, and the private reality alongside the legend. It means telling the story of the upstairs not as a mystery to be solved, but as a space to be understood. It means trusting that the public, given the right kind of access, not physical but emotional, can handle the truth of who Elvis Presley actually was. That trust is itself a kind of revelation. For decades, the locked staircase at Graceland communicated a message. Some things are not for public consumption, and that message was correct. But Riley's recent openness suggests a new chapter, one in which the family legacy is protected not through silence alone, but through carefully chosen, deeply felt honesty. She has framed the secrets upstairs not as secrets at all, but as memories, and memories, she has made clear, are staying home. There is something profoundly right about that. Graceland has always been extraordinary for what it contains and what it represents. But its most powerful quality may be the restraint, the simple, stubborn refusal to commodify everything. In a culture that demands total transparency, that turns grief into content and privacy into suspicion, the locked second floor of Memphis Mansion has stood for nearly 50 years as a quiet act of resistance, a declaration that some spaces are for the living, not for the public record. Riley